The utopian ideas were really global. They were encompassing the whole of humankind, and the whole way we live should be changed. So really everything, every aspect of life, every desire should be fulfilled, and everything should be good. And that used to be the primary idea, and what a lot of utopian thinkers back in the old days were following. And that's quite contrary to what we're witnessing now with the new utopian ideas, because many of those are quite local. They are not focused on the whole of humanity or the whole of human desires, but rather on rather particular desires, on rather particular technological branches and particular ideas, and to develop them. So they do not encompass the whole of humankind or the whole of human problems, but just very particular questions. Okay, so this has been a short introduction on this new utopian research which we're doing, and now I'm just trying to mention some utopian impact within hacker thinking. So hackers have actually repeatedly provided utopian ideas, or had utopian ideas in the back of their heads, which then came out in some sort of technological developments or some sort of books every once in a while, or writings. Of course, these utopian ideas have been intimately tied to information and communication technologies very closely, so they are traditionally technology-oriented in a way. And the interesting thing about the hackers' utopian ideas is now that they've actually been changing over the last years due to the rise of information technology. Information technology back in the 50s, 60s used to be a very particular technology just for very particular use. But it now grew into a huge societal phenomenon. So actually the first utopian ideas, which were back in the heads of a few hackers, had a chance to develop into some huge actual societal change and societal ideas, because whatever you were thinking you could do with information technologies, which was probably completely meaningless in the 50s because nobody had a computer, is now an idea which you can extend on a large scale and actually imply onto society. So that's an interesting thing to look at from a researcher's perspective, because you can see just how the utopian ideas have been growing alongside the growth of information technology. This is basically what I've been trying to look at a little, and I've been trying to follow the utopian ideas according to the social diffusion and the ensuing potential for technological development and or social change within information technology. And there are basically 4 stages, I believe, which you can discern. Stage 1 is the stage of some sort of proto form of a utopian idea, which is not really yet utopian, and it's very local, it's very technology-oriented. You can place it back in the 50s, 60s, and you can pinpoint it actually down to the story of the Tech Model Railroad Club at the MIT, and the emergence of the hacker ethic, which was outlined by Stephen Levy. It wasn't that much of an explicit process anyway. Levy interpreted it into this group later, but actually the hacker ethic is some sort of a utopian perspective on how to handle information technology and what you could do with information technology and how you could live with information technology. So it was some sort of proto form of a local little utopian thing there, like this. A couple of the ideas we have, the paragraphs we have a utopian sounding to them. Like information should be free, or the current version information must be free. Computers can change the world for the better, or distrust authority. These were all things which emerged very closely to the working conditions actually back in the 50s, 60s, and in this particular group of the Tech Model Railroad Club. I don't know if you've read the story from Levy, but they were actually very intimately tied to the working conditions which the group was confronted with. Like they didn't have access to any sort of information they needed to develop computers, so that was the first point where they said, well, information should be free, I should have access to all sort of scientific information about computers. And they weren't allowed by the professors and the authorities in the lab to play and meddle around with the computers, so they said, well, you got to distrust authorities. That's not a very good thing when you're trying to research and when you're trying to develop stuff. And of course, they had the perspectives from themselves, because they enjoyed computers a lot, that computers can actually change the world for the better. So that was sort of a very personal, very intimate, and very local idea which evolved back in those days. But it had this utopian extension, because if everyone was like us, and if everyone could enjoy computers that much as we did, which was the thought of the first group back then a world in line with a hacker ethic would just be a great place. And so that was some sort of a diffuse utopian extension, which developed back there. But of course, the group back then didn't have a clue what that could look like. Like, computers were huge and hugely expensive, and there wasn't any sort of idea how computers could actually be small and diffused throughout society, and what use they could actually have for that. So that was still a very diffuse and not very broad first idea which developed back in that stage. So stage 2 is actually then a longer period from the 60s to the 80s. It's a phase where we can see that the Hackers Utopia is actually sort of materializing, growing stronger and growing more profound and more richer, because some basic technologies come up, the PCs come up, and some first networks come up, and first ideas on how things could be networked and meshed into each other, and some other ideas on how you could use computers for a variety of uses, not just scientific calculations and stuff like that. And then these first technological trends were extrapolated then by the hackers back then, and by the scientists working with computers back then, onto a societal scale. They were saying basically, well, if computers get smaller and cheaper, then why shouldn't they get very small and very cheap, and everybody should have a computer? And if you can apply computers actually to a number of uses, and not just scientific calculations, why shouldn't you be able to apply it to any sort of use? And then there was also the same idea with networking. If I can network just a few computers, like in the ARPANET, why shouldn't I network all the computers and have access to a lot of information, do a lot of research, do a lot of development? So those were like first developments which allowed a more substantial extension of utopian thought. So the large-scale societal diffusion of computers and of networks seemed principally possible. It didn't seem very real back then, because it was still very expensive and still a very exclusive use and an exclusive group which did all these things. So there was no sort of ideology to develop, but a more rich utopian idea certainly developed. And we can see this in a couple of mentioning a couple of technologies developing. For instance, Ted Nelson had the idea of the internet 1965, 4 years before the emergence of ARPANET, and he published it in 1975 in his book. And a couple of other ideas like that come up as well, where people have actually been thinking about what could happen and what society could develop from these basic technologies. And these ideas, of course, interacted very intimately with technical research and development. So Ted Nelson, for instance, developed the hypertext because he was convinced of his utopian idea of the internet, that the internet would come up someday, and so he thought, well, if it comes up one day, then the hypertext is a good thing we should have, and I'm going to develop this now and sort of produce and try to help my utopian idea to develop and to come onto into a more realistic thing. Okay, so stage 3 then slowly developed. That's a stage of local ideology. It's still local, but it becomes more not only technology-oriented, but also social-oriented. Actually, it comes from the 80s up to now, and this is the phase where we see the real large-scale distribution of computers and the internet for a number of users, connecting all people, and an explosion really of users and of users as well. So that, of course, gave a substantial impact for utopian thinking for these people who were concerned with the spread of the internet and with the development of new social ideas coming with it. And of course, then over the years, the technology more and more existed. It was already there. The internet was there, the computer was there, and actually now, over the past years, everybody has a computer and everybody has the internet. So it's not anymore that we have to be so technology-oriented if we wanted to propose some utopian ideas, But we can rather turn to the social organization. We have to talk about the conditions of use. So if we want to realize the free information society and stuff like that, ideas like that. So the